All right, it is August 20th, 2024, and this is the second video in the new Uniting WordPress YouTubers side quest that we're all on. I am really stoked that you all are here today, especially some newer faces. I appreciate people jumping into this. If you are watching this and you're like, I should be a part of this, I want to be a part of this, please comment and I will track you down and you're welcome to join. This is not meant to be exclusive. So please raise your hand and ask to join, and we would love to have you. I'm trying to get as many folks as possible to jump into this and jump into the conversation. So once more, I want to give big thanks for just everyone joining and all the hard work you all do to share on YouTube. I do see it as a contribution to WordPress in many ways and appreciate the efforts to educate others. And as a reminder, just for folks who haven't been on this before, this is an effort to basically get everyone in the same room to have a productive, meaningful space, both to kind of understand more of what you all are seeing and the feedback you all are getting, and also to streamline and help you all get access to information. And so it's intentionally bi-directional. I want it to be that way. I want you all to be able to be like, and give us more information on this. And then I want to be like, can you all be really specific about the feedback that you all are getting in a way that's, yeah, productive and meaningful for everyone. And I always like to set the stage with this, but before we dive in more, I try to embrace and would encourage everyone else to embrace a kind, collaborative, open headspace. Sometimes tough stuff gets brought up, and that's I want us to have hard conversations. And I think kind also means critical. Like I don't see those as separate. So I just want to put that out there. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I feel like sometimes when I enter a space, people start getting quieter, and I don't want that to be the case. And I know, I read a lot of stuff on the internet. I see a lot of the comments, and I welcome the feedback directly. It's really a kindness to me. So let's start with intros again, since this is a newer effort. And then after intros, I want to hand it to a special guest, Aaron Jordan, who's on this call for a little couple minute spiel about how the WordPress project works. He's a very long time core committer, and so I'm really excited to have him on here. If there's other folks that you'd like to hear from too, I think we can do that in the future, is like bringing folks into these spaces to help. And then I want to jump into some feedback that you all might have, just current things on your mind, kind of an open dialogue there after talking about how the project works and having some Q&A. And then I think we can end on some recent news around Jamie Marsland joining with YouTube. I want to make sure to call that out, joining to run WordPress or YouTube, and kind of talk about that, as well as there should be space, hopefully space, to end on anything that you all have on your minds too that you wanted to bring into this call. I always feel like there's not enough time on this, so at some point I'll have to cut us off. But yeah, let's start with intros, and let's keep it contained to name, location, years of working with WordPress, and favorite color, because I think it's fun to learn about people, and I'm curious if we all have like a similar favorite color. I'll start and pass it off. So my name's Anne McCarthy. I'm in Seattle, Washington, and I've been working with WordPress since 2011 as a student at university, and my favorite color is blue. And I will note I am sponsored by Automattic. I think that is more relevant for me to mention than other folks on this call. Let's have Brendan. Will you kick it off next?
Hello, Brendan O'Connell. I am in San Diego, California. I've been using WordPress probably almost a decade, and favorite color is also blue. I'm going to go with sticking with I'll say WordPress blue.
Ooh, wow, you just really stepped it up a notch. I feel foolish. That's great. Joel, will you go next?
Hi, everybody. Good to see you again and get to see the new faces. My name is Joel Rivera. I'm from the Bronx, New York, and I've been working with WordPress for about a decade now as a developer, programmer, and things of that nature. And my favorite color is black. You're going to probably see me wearing black all the time whenever I'm on video.
Love it. A little uniform. That's good. Jackson, will you go next?
Sure thing. Jackson here, YouTuber, WordPress creator, developer, designer. Been working with WordPress for 12 plus years, in the web biz for 16 plus years. And favorite color. Oh, I'm in Brighton at the moment, going on my way to Italy, and my favorite color is blue. Although there's nothing blue in my background, which is a bit weird.
You and me both. I know,
Yeah.
I feel bad. Not really repping in the favorite color well. Kevin, will you go next?
Sure. My name's Kevin. I'm from Atlanta. I've been using WordPress since 2005. Former agency owner, software developer, and favorite color, I guess, being a CSS framework guy, it's I'll just go with the CSS colors. Medium sea green.
There you go. You're repping it. Hector, will you go next?
Sure. I'm Hector. I'm based in Spain. I'm also a sponsor contributor by Automatic. I'm not a YouTuber, but I work very closely with Anne and Nick. That's the reason I'm here to say hello to you all. And my favorite, well, I've been working with WordPress nearly a decade as well, but contributing full time for about 4 years. And my favorite color is blue. You don't see anything blue, but I see all the blue all over my my desktop.
Love it. Nick, will you go next?
Sure. My name is Nick Diego. I'm from Minneapolis, but coming to you from beautiful Vermont. And I'm a full-time contributor with Automatic, and I focus on developer relations, connecting with developers, and also some core contributions. Oh, favorite color? Green, but I never wear green. I just like the color.
This is good. So we got black, we got blue, and we got green. Okay, this is a good contest. Let's see. Matt, will you go next?
Yeah. Hey, Matt Medeiros, 15-ish years in WordPress. Yeah, I'll go with blue as well.
I think blue's winning right now. Nathan, will you go next?
I will if I could find the mute button. Yeah, Nathan. I'm Nathan. I'm from the UK, and I've been working with WordPress, maybe 12 years, something like that. I genuinely don't have a favorite color. I'll go with this, whatever this is, peach. Yeah,
Nice.
peach.
Aaron, will you go next?
I am Aaron Jorban. I am a WordPress core committer. I'm a nomad currently in Brooklyn, New York, for the next week. And my favorite color is green. But like Nick, I also almost never wear green.
I feel like if we ever all meet up, I'm gonna make us all wear our favorite colors. This is a fun reminder. Mark, will you go next?
For sure. Thank you, Ann. Mark Szymanski, location is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, United States. Agency owner, consultant, YouTuber guy since we've been working with WordPress specifically since like 2017, 2018. And then I would say my favorite color is red. And like Hector, you can't see it behind me, but it is on the desk here. The PC has got some red accents and stuff like that. So
I dig it. Very few red. That's interesting. Paul, will you go next?
Sure. I'm Paul. I'm from the UK, online content creator, online educator. Favorite color? Black. You can make me wear that anytime. That's fine.
Amazing. Barna, will you close us out?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, everyone. Derek, I missed you. Hold on.
Almost.
Almost.
I'll let Barna go first. From Hungary. I've been using WordPress since 2013 and teaching it for the past almost 7 years. My favorite color is anything dark.
I love it. You're actually representing well. This is good. Derek, if your favorite color is not blue, we're in trouble. Will you go?
Oh, I got you. It is blue. It is blue. So it's like most of my wardrobe is always going to be some shade of blue. Derek Hansen, located in Ames, Iowa, and have been using WordPress for about 10 plus years.
Yeah, collectively, we have many decades of WordPress in this space, which is really neat. Thank you all for enjoying yourselves. At this point, I want to set some context for why the next topic has come to mind. Part of it is like by request, like there are folks who have asked and have shared, why is X, Y, and Z happening? What is project leadership doing with this? How are things decided? Like all of those big, hard questions. And I think those are great questions to ask. When I first ventured into the space, I was asking the same things. Where are the power structures? Where is momentum? How are things decided? And I think running the FSC outreach program gave me like an interesting look into that, both into how things work and like why things aren't shipped when they are, and how that process happens. And so I thought it would be neat to Aaron very kindly agreed to jump in, and he has been doing this way longer than I have, and also at a greater depth, being a core committer. And so I would like to turn it to him to kind of talk about this, and then kind of turn it to you all to ask questions and get into it. Just because I do think it's really helpful to know, especially when you're hearing repeat feedback and you're creating videos, to kind of understand how things work. Does that sound good to folks? Cool. And some of you might already know this, but it's also neat to just chat with Aaron. And I keep wanting to call you Jordan, I think, because your username. Do you have a preference?
Both are perfectly fine.
Okay. All right, Jordan, will you take it away?
Sure. So I will first off say that I am not sponsored by any specific company. I do have 16 individuals and companies that do sponsor me through GitHub sponsors, but I'm not an employee of any company. And so one of the common misconceptions I see is that, WordPress is produced by Automattic. Obviously, I think anyone that is producing content in the space knows that that is a falsehood, even though there are many automaticians who do contribute, and including many that are core committers. I looked, it's been a couple of years, but it's about half of the active committers. And by active, I mean anyone that's committed within the last year that are employed by Automattic or have been employed by Automattic at some point in time. But one of the things that I see a lot is that, how do decisions get made? And the most important document in WordPress for that is our philosophy page. And so this page lays out, basically what WordPress as a project, thinks, and how, I would say this is how we make decisions. Core committers will reference, specific philosophy points on here, regularly. If we're disagreeing, either amongst committers or, with other contributors, like it'll often be the philosophies that we come back to and try to look at. And so each of these, there is, a single like short phrase, for example, out of the box. And then there's also a longer description that kind of talks about like what that's supposed to mean. So, I mean, WordPress aims to be, work out of the box. What that means in practice is that, there should be minimal configuration. What that means in a like decision-making process is that we want to abstract the technical details. So a phrase that you may see run into from time to time on Make Core or on Track is WordPress will take on technical debt so its users don't have to. And basically, it's much better for WordPress to, solve its way around a million different hosting configurations than for every individual to have to solve, problems for their specific site. I don't know if anyone was a Linux user in like the mid 2000s like I was, but like if you were setting up your laptop with Linux in 2005, you were going to be spending weeks Googling how to get each specific piece of it working. WordPress does not want to be like that. And so each of these philosophies are ones that I would definitely recommend reading. If anyone has questions about specific ones, I'm happy to answer them now. I'm also reachable in Slack and happy to chat in Slack. Probably the ones that I see most misunderstood, decisions, not options. And so people often ask, why doesn't WordPress just add an option to, do something rather than make me install a plugin? In the core team's opinion, a plugin is the option. It is the way to, enable that. It's not something that every user should have to do. I can post a couple of other links to some of the documents that inspired this. There's a gentleman named Havoc Pennington, who was the user experience lead for one of the Linux distros. It's escaping my mind. But he basically wrote about, if anyone remembers software Pigeon, which was an instant messaging client, and you would go into the settings, and there'd be settings panels within settings panels within settings panels. And essentially each time there's an option, that's another, one, cognitive load that a user needs to think about. Two, it is something that like another way the software can be configured and a way things can go wrong. If there are, 4 options, that is, each one is binary, that is 16 different configurations that can, be set up. If you add a 5th one, it goes up exponentially. And so having less options means there's less ways things can be configured. And probably the most common bug that I see is bugs that happen because every website is very, very different. So yeah, I'm happy at any time if anyone also wants someone to appear on your YouTube channel to talk about these philosophies, happy to join anyone for the discussion. I see one hand, so Mark, I assume you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, Jordan, I really appreciate that context there, man. Like that, I think that really gets to the heart. I think right at the surface there of stuff that I see all the time. So just a super high level question though, because I don't know if I've ever visited the philosophy page, so thank you for linking that. Has that been since day one? Has that ever been amended or changed at all? And like you said, like the opinion of the core team, that's a really important statement. Does that ever fluctuate, or has that always been as it is? You know what I'm saying? Like just from what you're going on there, because that's a really important point that you bring up, the example like with the plugins, so to speak.
Yeah, so these have evolved over time, but they haven't changed much in the last decade or so. So the last new one added is the deadlines are not arbitrary. And I could find Matt wrote a make core post basically laying that out and added it to the options page or the philosophy page. And I am guessing my memory might be slightly wrong. That was
guess 2011.
Oh,
2010. Goes good.
Yeah.
Sweet. Thank you.
So I can also find there is a page that Ryan Boren, who Ryan was one of the original lead developers of WordPress. He's actually the person that has added more code to WordPress than anyone else. And he hasn't been active in over a decade at this point. So that just tells you how much work he did in the first decade of WordPress. He wrote a page that is a part of the Codex that lays out some of the early philosophies that eventually evolved into what you see on WordPress.org right now.
I will jump in to say, since you invoked Ryan Boren, he now runs a group called Stimpunks. And so I highly encourage you all to donate if you've benefited from WordPress, because he has contributed so much code and has done so much for the project. So I just wanted to mention that while we're bringing it up, just to further what he does. And that's built on WordPress, I'm pretty sure, using a block theme. So yeah, Boren's awesome. What other questions do folks have? Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, so just to piggyback on what Mark says, reading that paragraph right there, for example, I do think it would be a great idea for somebody to come in and update things, right? The average WordPress user simply wants to be able to write without problems or interruption. So like, for example, my audience has 0 bloggers in it. If I was to poll them, probably, right? They're agency owners, they're freelancers, they are people that want to build business and marketing websites, and they want to, their scope is well beyond blogging, right? So reading the philosophy page of WordPress, of course, we know WordPress has a history of it is a blogging platform. It's what it started out as, but that's not what people use it for anymore. So I think that in a lot of ways, I think it would be a great idea to start to update some of this language, because when my audience reads that, they're not going to feel like that's written for them, or that this software is necessarily designed for them, for example.
So, I mean, for that, I would say, even if they are not, if they are people creating sites for other individuals. Ideally, those sites are getting updated. There are very few sites that, should never be updated. Even something like you think about like a restaurant website. And I use that as an example because in my early freelance days, I did a bunch of restaurant websites. Like all of them, I got them publishing like, what are your specials? What, like post once a month, even if it's just a paragraph, it's something. And it's, that empowers them, that encourages people to come back to the website. It makes it seem as though the website and the business are actually caring. And so even if, a site is thinking like, oh, we don't need to worry about the writing experience and people writing content is very important. And so that's why I think something like that is actually really important to stay, even if it isn't everyone, even if it is people that are focused more on creating sites for other individuals.
I wonder though, like if there's a way, like that's interesting feedback of like, you may not, as WordPress has expanded, as websites have expanded, like, yes, we need to focus on the base editing experience and writing experience, just like SEO best practices of having fresh content. But, as WordPress tries to get more folks online and in an open source way, it could be interesting to add language that's not just about folks writing posts, but that could maybe talk about how WordPress has like expanded beyond its roots. I don't know. That's interesting. I'll note that down in the notes and see about servicing that. I have no idea. This is where it's like updating the philosophies page is probably very precious. Like I think the roadmap page on WordPress.org is very precious too. And so some of the stuff is hard to change, but I think it's good feedback and good to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think the general question that it brings up is WordPress's identity going into the next 10 years. Is it a blogging platform, or is it a platform that has a much broader use case, essentially? Because the current philosophy essentially writes as if it is still a blogging platform, and that is the primary use, and that is the vision of it. Is that vision going to expand from an official perspective?
But also, sorry to interrupt there, to kind of carry on from what you're saying, Kevin, has anyone ever actually thought to poll the user base to get a sort of an idea of what the average WordPress user actually uses WordPress for? Because like Kevin says, it's like, yes, it started as a blogging platform, but that was years ago when it was a blogging platform. It's gone way beyond that with the advent of page builders and ACF and things where you can expand what WordPress can do exponentially. And again, much the same as Kevin said, my audience, which is probably very similar to Kevin's audience, they're not bloggers. They have probably zero interest in blogging. They're people that are building websites for themselves, for businesses, for, clients, agencies, individual freelancers, and so on. And a blogging, the blogging side of it is probably a tiny, tiny percentage. So it would be interesting for WordPress themselves to actually poll their users. You're only going to get a small subsection, but at least it's going to give an idea of what the average user base would be interested in. At least then, if you do look at changing the wording or anything else to do with, the official word about WordPress itself, at least it's kind of more relevant to the actual user base and not necessarily where it was 10 or 15 years ago when it was primarily a blogging platform.
Yeah, there is an annual survey that's done that I think is what you're probably touching on. I don't know, Jordan, if you have other thoughts on that, but to me, the annual survey is exactly meant to do that and see how people are using the platform, whether they make money, whether they build their businesses off of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, a couple of my thoughts. One, it's interesting seeing this because I can remember when I started using WordPress in 2007, there were many, many, articles and about, WordPress as a CMS, use WordPress as a CMS. It's not blogging software. So this isn't a like new thing. The second is if you actually look in the software, the word blog, I believe we've eliminated every instance of blog from the UI of WordPress. I could be wrong, and then there might still be a few, but that's one. There's been a long-term effort to take away to blog not being the terminology that is used in the admin and presented to people of WordPress. I also will caution that while your audiences might be people that build sites for others. The users of WordPress in this instance are the people that have the site. And even people that don't realize that WordPress is what's running their website are the users of WordPress in many cases.
If I can jump in real quick over here, just wanted to add my 2 cents on this. I think it's a good conversation because the reality of WordPress has been around for so long, since back in the day when it came out in the early 2000s. It started off as a blogging platform primarily. We know that it evolved to be an e-commerce platform, a CMS platform, and also a CRM in many cases, right? But the reality is with search engine optimization, it's constantly changing. And while we may not blog as often as we used to back in the day, it's still something that adds a layer of authenticity. And I think that's something that people are going to be looking for moving forward. With the advent of artificial intelligence, people are getting aware of when something is written by AI and when something's written by the actual person. So even if it's a big company or if it's a small business, there's some level of authenticity that could be presented when a person or a business does a monthly or weekly blog post. So I think we as YouTubers, as developers, as WordPress users, even if we build websites for clients, it's important for us to let them know what it takes for a website to succeed. One, it takes a well-formed and highly functional website. But on top of that, it requires good quality content and a level of authenticity where a person, a user, a visitor can actually connect with that site and with that business. So I hear exactly what everybody's saying because I don't blog as often as I should. We all get busy, but in reality, it's something that I think we all have to probably get back to our roots when it comes to WordPress. And yes, obviously it's not just a blogging platform, it's how it evolved, but it's something that we can probably get back to our roots and probably have to spread that message as well. No matter how big you are, that level of authenticity is important. Just my 2
Can I
cents.
jump in? Can I jump in for a second? Joel, I 100% like agree with where you're coming from there. If I could just take that though and ask a different question while we have like Jordan and like the like, you know, like the core here is, I think a different way to say it is, yes, blogging is, and, you know, potentially always will be like a core piece of that. But I think one way that I've heard it kind of like translated from, you know, us and like others in our communities too, is like, what is WordPress's stance on, and maybe you mentioned it a little bit earlier, what is WordPress's and the core's stance on the other things? If we had to break it down into like blogging, e-commerce, any sort of other like content management that's not like inherently built into the CMS already, like you have to go get extra plugins and things. Are those priorities, or is the core position on that those are not really priorities because WordPress is supposed to be like a base layer that you're supposed to be able to extend, and those things are not like supposed to be in the core? Am I making sense there? Is that can provide some clarity?
You're absolutely making sense. And I would say the like things like CRM, e-commerce, those are things that are absolutely not things that should be in the core of WordPress. Those are things that like one, the fact that there's a healthy plugin ecosystem that includes a couple of different options for all of those, I think is great. I think that, you know, if core decided that, oh, we want to provide e-commerce, let's just adopt easy digital downloads, and that's going to be shipping in core. I think that that would, you know, like ultimately be the wrong decision because the majority of sites don't need that. A restaurant doesn't need that. You know, I run a website for a nonprofit. They do not need, you know, a full-fledged e-commerce solution. They need to be able to accept donations, but like they don't need a giant e-commerce system. They don't need, you know, a CRM. And so, you know, yeah. Those could be plugins.
Like I would say there is like a level of like with plugins and themers, we do provide extension points for them. Like if a bunch of folks who are trying to extend WordPress are running into the same problem, that's where like new APIs will be introduced. Like for example, 6.7 is slated to have a template API for registering block templates and making that easier, more streamlined. Like that came out from multiple plugin authors being like, this is a pain. We're doing all these weird workarounds. Can core come up with a solution? So it's not coming in the core software, if that makes sense, meaning like we're building out a bunch of new functionality, but we're providing extension points which I think is like a nuance that's hard to get. Like Jordan's saying, like we're not going to implement e-commerce here, but we do want e-commerce plugins to be able to do what they need to do. And that's where working with extenders, reaching out to extenders, that's part of what Nick Diego does. That's part of what Damon Cook does, Brian Gardner. Like there's a lot of folks in the community who do that work to bring folks in.
If I could jump in there, and because that kind of answers something else that for me is like a big sticking point, is like no custom post types built into core. That there's several different top plugins that have that. And so your scenario that you described, ACF is never going to come to core and say, hey, can you guys put this into core? They make too much money off that. So where does that fit in to this whole conversation? Because I mean, that kind of what Aaron Jordan was saying with the functionality of core, and then you can extend off it with multiple top tier plugins like that. Does that mean we can just assume that's never coming to core?
Yeah, so like let me give a live example right now. So there's a plugin called Multi-Collab built by Multidots. They build real-time collaboration stuff, including things like inline comments. One of the projects for phase 3, collaboration workflows, is around inline comments and Google Docs style comments. I've been in touch with them and have worked with them basically to start implementing inline commenting, because it's a product, it's something they offer, but they know it's coming to core. And so they're contributing back to it right now. And there's actually an active PR that they've been working on. I can drop links to it after I finish the spiel. And folks on our VIP side are also helping with that. And we have Ella, who's one of the longtime core committers, who's also helping shepherd that. We have some design folks who are reviewing the design of it and kind of building this contribution experience. Now, why would they do that? This is coming to core. They can still build advanced functionality on top of what we're building. So you'll see this with various plugins where like core will go this far and the plugins will go this far. And so that's where, that's like a real live example right now where you have a plugin who already has this functionality that we're bringing into core in some way in the future. And they're contributing back the code because they know it's coming and they want to be future-proof and also help implement that feature, take what they've learned from it. And also if they know the ins and outs of it, they can build on top of it real easy. Like it kind of is a neat win-win-win. Nick, I think your hand went up first. And then Kevin.
I beat you by a fraction of a second, Kevin. I can speak to the ACF stuff a little bit because we've had meetings with them, and ACF can do so much stuff. I mean, it's amazing what ACF can do. But one of the things that we've been working with them more so on is how to more tightly integrate ACF with core, especially around like blocks and that kind of stuff. And so I think that like I cannot imagine having something as feature rich as ACF in core. But the more we can make sure that they can extend core to bring their functionality into the variety of different user interfaces, the editor, the site editor, whatever. So there's that more like, yes, you need a separate plugin in ACF, but it's more tightly coupled to the core experience. That's at least where me and my team are focusing on, making sure that there's those extensibility mechanisms for them to be able to do that. And if they're not, bring those discussions back to core to make sure we add those where necessary.
Yeah, I think maybe that's a little bit of what Nick was saying. But so, for example, I think ACF is the perfect example to discuss with this. Custom fields, custom post types for the kind of work that we do at agencies and freelancers as well should be leveraging these things on almost every website. And so the idea that at least a baseline version of it is not in core is that's because I think a lot about onboarding new users and how does WordPress appeal to people who want to come into the ecosystem. And when you have basic functionality like that, that's basic CMS functionality that's not in core, that is then a decision they have to make. So they are now weighing options because there's multiple plugins that can do. Do I do Metabox? Do I do ACF? And what are the pros and cons? Now I'm down this rabbit hole of like, instead of doing my work, I am deciding on plugins in this ecosystem. And I think it was good that the survey was brought up because I was just scrolling down. Two things that we wanted to know the answer to. One is, how many people are using it purely for blogging? I don't think that was specifically asked. There's some questions that maybe allude to it. I think it should be specifically asked. I would like to know the percentage. But more importantly is the question, what is the most frustrating thing about WordPress? And there's a lot of answers, but the number one answer is too many plugins. And so if our philosophy is everything is solved by the availability of plugins, we are actually losing, if that's the answer, because people are actually saying that there are that's one of the biggest frustrations with WordPress, is there are too many plugins. And so things that are simple, like custom post types and custom fields, could be core, could be native. And then that's one less decision I have to make. By the way, the third one is security. And so the more plugins I add from third-party developers, that's also playing into the security frustration that people have. But I think that's an area where we core should probably provide at least a foundation of this. And then if people say, well, core didn't give me enough of what I need, now I'm willing to go look in the plugin repo, right? But if core does give me enough of what I need, that's an amazing thing, because now less decision making, less security issues, and it feels more cohesive.
Mark, I have a lot there's a lot here.
If you want to, yeah, I have a question that's like related to that, but it's short.
Yeah, let's do it. Great.
I'll throw it out real quick, and then you guys can respond to all that, because I know there's a lot of really good thoughts. My question is super high level, but like specific to you guys, because again, I love this back and forth. You guys are giving us a lot of really good stuff that we wouldn't know, because we don't know the actual philosophy of WordPress and the core contributing team as much. A simple question, as simple as I can make it, is what is the goal of the WordPress core team, so to speak? Like, whatever core committers core, like what is the goal of the WordPress project? I know it's like democratized publishing, WordPress for everyone. More specifically, because I think this is absolutely where guys like, people, anybody on these calls or anybody in our position, like get tripped up with a communication error. Is the goal to get WordPress as a platform in more people's hands, so to speak? Like, do we want more people using it? Is that actually a goal, or is the goal different than that? It's very nuanced there, but I think there's miscommunication there for sure, or at least like misunderstanding from at least me. Maybe I'm not speaking for anybody else, but just something to throw out there as well.
So in this case, I don't necessarily feel comfortable speaking for the entire core team. But what I would say is in 2000, I believe 15, is the last time there was like a core team meetup. And one of the things we did talk about was, what is the goal of WordPress? And it was unanimously agreed amongst the people in the room then that democratizing publishing is the goal. The goal is that anyone that wants to be able to publish content on the web should be able to publish content. Should be able to get their voice out there, whether that is a business looking to share its, information about itself for reaching potential customers, or whether that is an individual that's looking to post their political views, or an artist that wants to share their paintings. Like, they should be able to get their information out there. Whether every core committer would still agree with that, I don't know. I think so. But it's been many years since there were there are very, very few things that take place in WordPress that aren't extremely public. And the last time there was a private discussion was that time, at least as far as I know. If there was others, myself and no one that I talk to regularly on the core team has said anything about that to me. So to the question of like ACF and what, whether that belongs in core, I personally am of the opinion that there is a API available for that. It's the blocks API, and that the blocks are the way to create custom content on the web, in WordPress, and create custom interfaces. I was lucky enough to be able to volunteer and work on the White House's website when it relaunched in 2021. And that did not use ACF. That used the block editor. And like in that instance, it was, myself, Helen Hosandi. So you had two longtime core committers, driving the editor creation process. So like, obviously we know, you know, internals more than a lot of other people. That said, you know, neither of us have been Gutenberg core people. We've been, you know, advising and helping and working in small pieces, but that's not been our primary focus. And so we're still figuring it out. And I think we filed about a dozen bug reports afterwards, of all the things that we hated about creating websites with it.
Incredible. Matt.
Hey, Aaron, thanks for hanging out today. One topic I'd love for you to address is something that I've been trying to convey, and this is sort of extending a little bit of what we were just talking about, but if you could just help illustrate for the room the differences of why Gutenberg is developed largely on and communicated on GitHub versus core WordPress and the pit of death track that we've been on for many, many years. It's just one of the things that I try to do as a YouTuber is to get some of the normies involved with Gutenberg, because it is on GitHub, which is already an insurmountable task for many of them, but it is at least the most comprehensive. So I try to encourage folks to give feedback to Gutenberg through GitHub. And if you could just illustrate track, GitHub, and the whys of why we're using two different areas.
Yeah. So I will first off say, I hate that we're using two different areas. I think that it leads to a lot of unnecessary friction. And if I could wave a magic wand, I would have us not be using two different areas. That said, we are. It is just a fact. And what it is one, the core team, many of us like the fact that on track, we can have a good amount of control over the experience. And so one of the things, for instance, if you go to open a track ticket and there are a handful of keywords, XSS, cross-site scripting, unauthenticated, like if you type one of those in, it gives a big warning saying like, are you trying to report a security vulnerability? If so, you should, you know, go to this other place to report it. Confirm, you know, check this box before you can even submit to confirm you are not, you know, doing a security vulnerability. And like, we're able to control that experience. On GitHub, we're, you know, somewhat at the mercy of what GitHub provides us. And so in that case, that's one of the places where I really like track. As far as the, you know, less technical people getting involved, one of the ways I would say is make core, and the, you know, blog and comments there is a great way for people that are, you know, I'm worried about how to get involved in GitHub, or track scares me. Using the comments on the posts there, I know that, you know, can be it's a lot less frequent posts than, you know, tickets on track. I would say there's probably a given day, you know, 5 new tickets, and depending on the time in the release cycle and track, you know, 25 to 100 comments or tickets being active at, you know, a given day. And GitHub can often be even more. But it is still a great place. And so like, you'll often see a post. There was a post yesterday that went out about the next minor release, 6.6.2. And a person commented and said, hey, here's an issue that I've been having that I'd love to see fixed. And like, that's one way that anyone can, you know, easily come in, that there's a much lower barrier to entry. It's the same comment box that, you know, people are used to throughout the web and throughout their WordPress experience.
That's a great call. I do want to do a quick time check, just to see how folks are feeling. Like, I feel like this is a really lively, good discussion, so I don't want to cut it off. But I did want to leave space if folks can even stay a little bit past the hour. I just want to hear about like feedback that you all have as well. And also having Aaron here is huge for that too. Are we cool switching into kind of like the feedback piece of like the stuff that you all are hearing in the comments every day? Or we can always loop back with more questions. And Jordan, I really appreciate you joining this, by the way. It's just, you know, I'm learning stuff and it's just helpful to kind of be in the same space. So I encourage you all to take him up on the offer to join some of your streams, because talk about wealth of knowledge. Yeah, I would love, let's switch into feedback. I'm curious. I know a lot of times whenever even I post like small videos and get comments, it's like I'll hear about the navigation block, or I'll hear about switching themes and how templates don't stay with the theme whenever you switch and they're tied to each theme. I'm curious, like, what comes up for you all regularly. And like part of what I love about this group here is you have a wide range from end users to developers to agencies. And so I'm curious what comes up for each of your respective audiences, if there's like top 3 things that you feel like you're banging your head against all the time or having to answer all the time. That'd be really helpful to hear. And this will be a continuing conversation because it's part of why I want to have this group. So
I'll start because I've been going to quite a few of these WordPress meetups, like through whatever meetup.com. And I also do agency work, and I would say most of my clients don't even really log in. We probably just handle most of the stuff, but these meetups are full of people that are DIYers. And it goes back to what Kevin was saying with the number one complaint of WordPress is there's too many themes and plugins. And these people come in with, you know, 4 different themes, several plugins that conflict and do different things. And there's just so much to get to even just, decision making. Like, do you get the free version of these plugins? Do you get the pro version? What are the different pros and cons of all there's just so much decision fatigue. And then I've also been spending a good amount of time just like checking out Framer, Wix Studio, just like some non-WordPress builders, just to get a feel for UIs and things like that. And obviously, you know, it's apples and oranges. You can't really compare them like that. But I see that, and I see how easy it is to create a CMS item and collection in Wix, and the decision fatigue in WordPress. And that, you know, I would say, I don't know, worries me or just makes me pay attention to. So anyway, I'll throw that out there.
Yeah, that's a great thing to bring up. And I know part of what's been explored with refreshing the admin design as part of phase 3 is how we can make that better, both in terms of notifications from plugins taking over the screen, standardizing how plugins, you can interact with them, and offering a bit more personalization in the dashboard, where it's like you might have an overall site, but you log in as an editor and you're only seeing the stuff that you need to see, and you're not just getting met by a wall of notifications. How I feel every time I log into one of my dad's sites. It's like, oh, Dad, why did you install 5 plugins that do the same thing? You know, I see it personally all the time. So I think that's a great thing to raise. Also, definitely encourage folks to join those meetup groups. I love jumping on those. Super valuable.
I think in relation to that, and I know, Anne, maybe you and I talked about this, but questions around like onboarding for WordPress. And I think I know the stance on that. Is that like something that like the core team does not think should be, because that would influence like how people use WordPress? Or what's the, I don't know, like just the topic of onboarding, I feel like comes up a lot because of that. Is there a sentiment there around it?
I don't know, Jordan, if you want to answer that, but my answer is that core is not going to offer something opinionated. We'll provide the tooling, the extension to provide onboarding if a host or a plugin wants to do it. But, you know, how do you onboard folks when there's 43% of the internet? Or it's like, it's just too many use cases that like having a meaningful onboarding experience would be incredibly difficult. But there have been, if you look way back to like the origin of Matthias has a post that I'll try and pull up about blocks, is having like micro onboarding experiences. So when you add like an image block, there's like upload here, a media library, like there's mini onboarding within the interface, which I think we can do a better job of right now. Like I think, for example, one of the things that bugs me is that like the styles, the global style stuff is like when you're in a template, which makes it seem like you're just applying whatever it is to just that template, when really it's applying to your whole site. Like, how do we make that better and have a better onboarding experience into those systems? So that's kind of how I think about it. But yeah, I don't know, Jordan, if you have a different answer or more historical context than I have.
So I mean, over time, WordPress has tried many different things. There's a pointers API that hasn't really been used in maybe 15, 20 versions of WordPress. But you know, what it was it provided like the idea being like, well, when you upgrade to a new version, it is, you know, you'll see like a couple of different highlights, and there will be, you know, kind of this guided tour. Ultimately, like that didn't actually help people, you know, upgrade to new versions. One of the things that various times I've thought about, and this is, you know, personal thoughts, is like there used to be in Drupal this concept of flavors, and you basically could download, you know, a Drupal bundle of, you know, Drupal along with a handful of specific extensions. And, you know, like there'd be Drupal for real estate, and it would include, you know, specific real estate plugins. And like, would something like that in WordPress be good? And while like, yes, also no, because I don't want to be the person that has to decide which forms plugin is getting bundled. I know, Matt, you'd probably be happy to decide that one. But like, I'm sure that there would be lots of controversy, you know, in every way of like the core team selecting a specific third-party plugin. And so there is a, you know, for people that are installing many different WordPress sites, and this is very poorly documented, if at all documented, there's custom install routines. There's a drop-in called install.php. And so you can basically affect the install process. And this is something that hosts could be doing, but it's also something that individual, you know, people that are spinning up lots of websites could be doing to automate installing a bunch of different plugins, if, you know, they're regularly doing the same thing.
Yeah, if I could jump in here, I think you're right, Job, in the fact that it would be very difficult to try to say we have all these third-party plugins, we're going to recommend these versus these others. You run into a lot of politics there, and that becomes a big nightmare. For me in particular, when I'm spinning up a new website or when I'm talking to clients or when I'm doing something for someone I know, I have a bunch of scripts. I use WP CLI, and with that, you can install the theme, the plugins, and you can kind of categorize what type of website you're going to do. So you mentioned a real estate website. So there's a bunch of good real estate plugins that you can install, you know, that are dedicated to real estate. Or if it's going to be a e-commerce site, so there's the WooCommerce plugin, but there's a bunch of other smaller plugins that tie into that integrate greater integration for Stripe and stuff like that. So if you are dealing with a client, then it's a lot easier because you can easily direct them. The direction I think that WordPress is going in terms of the learn.wordpress.org feature, I think it's awesome. It's definitely evolved over the past, you know, recent times. And I think the addition of new resources in terms of how to develop and how to be a WordPress user, that's going to be great. And I think what we can do is probably promote that further. Because the thing is, you get a couple of types of different, you know, people using WordPress, right? You get the clients, or you get the people who don't want to really be hands-on. So that's where they'll have like a Mark or a Brendan or somebody that'll do a lot of the management for them. Or you'll get the people who are DIYers who say, all right, get me started, get me pointed in the right direction, but then I'll take it from here. So that is where I think learn.wordpress is going to be great in terms of, you know, promoting people to take a look at these lessons, follow this track. And then probably with the learn.wordpress, you can have a track based on each type of fundamental website you're going to build. Is it going to be an e-commerce site? How to build an e-commerce site? These are the types of plugins you're going to need for it, right? So you don't necessarily recommend one or two, but you say in general, you're going to want, you know, an e-commerce type plugin like WooCommerce or like Easy Digital Downloads or any of the other third-party plugins, and trying to balance out the politics of promoting one super plugin versus, you know, the smaller niche plugins. That's going to be a difficulty, but I think the track of getting people aware of the different learning resources, because it wasn't in this conversation, probably the last one, where people were saying that we have the codex, we have the WordPress.developer, developer.wordpress.org site, and there's so many different areas of documentation that it kind of makes it difficult to follow where the conversation taking place. So I think learn.wordpress is going to be good for that, and probably that can be the starting point for most people. And again, if you're doing an agency, if you are working with clients, then the biggest tip is just to use WP CLI, have a bunch of your bash scripts set up so that way once you get a website going, instead of taking 1 hour, 2 hours to get everything set up and configured. With WP CLI, with Bash scripts, you can get everything done in just a matter of minutes. My 2 cents.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do to kind of curate that further. And like playground blueprints are also like an interesting way of exploring this and like sharing them with people. Kevin, I want to go to you, and then Brendan, did you raise your hand?
I did, but I
Okay.
can go after.
Let's do Kevin, Brendan, and then Jackson.
Okay, so I'll just speak to the feedback and frustrations of my audience that I'm constantly hearing. I think there's maybe and maybe Aaron can speak to this as well, maybe like a forgotten or less recognized cohort of users that is quite large, that feel, the work being done in WordPress is heavy on block editor right now, and has been for some time. This user base does not use blocks, and really has no desire to use blocks. We know that Elementor, Divi, the page builder community is large. It's gigantic, and they have their workflow, they have their process, and they have their opinions of how a website is built. And the block editor is a very opinionated alternative to alternative workflow, right? And then we talk about the clients that we're working for. These are not clients that build their own websites. These are clients that have websites built for them or want to choose themes and fully designed layouts and all of this other stuff, and work from that point going forwards. And in order to build those things for those people, we need a robust environment to do that. And we feel that the block editor in its native state is not robust enough for us to do our work in it. We have to then go to VS Code and work in files and the stuff that we didn't want to do previously, that we were trying to get away from, which is why a lot of people went to page builders in the first place. And what this has ended up doing is isolating the community. So we have the people who want to use page builders, but everything is being done, all the innovation is being done for people who use blocks. And the CMS side of things is not being innovated to the level, at least, that maybe it should be. And then there's not really a recognition of all of the people over here doing this kind of work, leveraging WordPress. It's like, hey, if you're not using blocks, we really don't want anything to do with you. I don't know if that is I'm asking, what is the sentiment? And then I guess a productive question to tack on to that would be, how do you reconcile the fact that I think it's over 50% of users still opt out of the block editor by installing the classic editor plugin, right? So they are actively saying, I don't want to involve myself in the block editor project. I actually would prefer the TinyMCE route or whatever, because I use these other tools. So I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah, no, this brings up a great point, and this is something that's come up a lot whenever I was running the FC Outreach program. Jordan, feel free to jump in too. To me, I think part of what my ideal world is the page builders are building on top of core. And so there's not this huge difference, and no one's locked in. They can switch between different page builders and it can still work. And like, I think that's part of why you're seeing a lot of innovation on that side, is because ideally this can be done where it's hand in hand. Like, these improvements that come to core also benefit the page builders. Like, and right now, exactly as you described, like page builders leaked ahead before core did. And so now people are left in these weird spots. And I totally agree with you. I think we need to, this is an audience and something that we need to pay attention to and also learn from, like, what's working well with page builders? What do we need to implement in core? Like all that sort of stuff. And so I know I look at page builders a lot. I test them a lot. I'm looking at what's being done there too. And I think part of it is just like building on top of, so there's not this tension, and that's like my ideal, but like the practicalities of that can get really messy in the same way, like talking about onboarding can get really messy.
Real quick there, Anne, though, what you're saying effectively is like no more page builders in their current form. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm just saying, like, a lot of them don't do that, right?
But some do. So I think that that's the other thing, is like some you aren't necessarily locked into. And this is part of the tension of the community. And this is like, that is a whole, like, oh man, if I could spin up a million communities, there would be one that'd be like talking to page builders, like, and like having a call exactly like this with page builders. And then another would be like with agencies. Another, like, I just, as one person, if someone wants to spin that up, free idea, open source, please have at it. I think part of it too that you're touching on as well is like people who don't want to use blocks, how do they benefit from this? Or people who want to stay in classic themes, how do they benefit from this? What benefit is there? That's a big piece of feedback we've gotten on marketing for the releases is like, how this feature's out. Okay, font library. Can I use it with my classic theme? No, that's something we need to actually add as a gradual adoption pathway. And that's something that like in 6.6, we brought like a modern pattern experience to classic themes. And that's something that we need to be very vigilant about is bringing back functionality that's being built in a block theme world, like the font library, so classic theme authors can use it, or the style book, so classic theme authors can use it, or theme users, sorry, not authors. Like that's something that I think needs to continually be done to bring everyone with us. And then also there's frankly a certain point where like what's being created needs to be compelling enough to switch too, like at a certain point to stay up to date, to stay future proof. We have a backwards compatibility promise, but we also don't want to lose to proprietary systems. So there's this inherent tension all across the board that I think is really difficult to walk. And I don't know how, Jordan, you've done it for this long, but I'm curious what you'd have to add. Those are just my personal thoughts too.
I think this is one of those areas that the data liberation work that Matt's been pushing for is really valuable in every direction. I think that it should be very easy that if you're unhappy with how Gutenberg and the full site editing process is working, if you want to switch to use Divi because that's going to be better, that should be an easy process for you. You know, if you think that like you're using Divi, but you would be happier using Elementor, that should be an easy process and one that WordPress should be enabling and encouraging. These are, you know, not short processes. I mentioned the nonprofit website that I work on. That site right now, half the pages are managed using Divi, half the pages are managed using Gutenberg. All of the posts are in the classic editor. And then of the custom post types, half of them are in Gutenberg and half of them are classic editor. So, I mean, it is a hodgepodge. I hate the person that built that, aka me. But, you know, it is, you know, one example, and I think probably a not uncommon situation that, you know, exists. And so the more that, you know, it can be easy to move from one to the other. As Anne was mentioning, you know, that Gutenberg, the block editor, provides the base that these site editors can build upon. That is, you know, much better for the end user ultimately than, you know, locking them into one place.
So really quick, if I could, just for some clarification, because I might not understand how FSE works entirely, but isn't the homepage tied into a template, so it's not a page? And so if you ever switch, if you go to 2025 next year, you lose your homepage. And I was curious how that functions in this philosophy.
So there are like going into those details, and I'm guessing Nick or Anne might be better positioned to talk about these.
I was like, I could dive into that. That's cool. Yeah. Basically right now templates are tied to a theme. So it depends on how users are customizing the template. But yeah, that is a huge, like I've been thinking about this for literally 4 years now. There's this issue around decoupling block themes into composable parts. And I run into this personally. I love switching my theme. I switch it all the time. And I literally have a pattern that keeps some of my like homepage content that I want. And this is something we need to figure out both the technical solution for moving these between themes. And then you also have to think about like how you can have active or deactivated templates. And then you also have to think about the theme switching flow. So how do we explain to users when they're switching what they want to keep, what they want to get rid of? And ultimately that can unlock cool stuff. Like I want to use style variations from X, Y, and Z theme on a BC theme. Like there's some really neat like mixing and matching that can happen. And that's something we definitely need to solve. Like that is 100% preaching to the choir with that one. Yeah. And Brendan, I don't know if you wanted to chime in next. I think you were next and then Jackson.
Mine's really quick too, and I'll throw it to Jackson. But it's really just something I forgot to add earlier, which is like I was critiquing like all the massive amounts of plugins and themes or whatever. It's also WordPress's greatest strength, right? So like a lot of these things we're talking about, I run into this and talk to people about it, is the double-edged sword of WordPress. It's so open, so available, so great, so extendable. it makes it way more complex, and you have to make all these decisions. So that was all. And I don't know how you solve that other than like taking the best plugins and subsuming them into core, but it doesn't seem like that's kind of mean too. I don't know. Anyway, that's all.
Yeah, I think this is where like hosting companies can do a lot to provide a bit more of a curated experience in agencies. Like I think that's part of why I really think it's interesting to talk to agencies and how they're using the site and introducing it to folks and locking it down or opening it up. It's a whole other can of worms. Jackson.
Yeah, I mean, I guess mine is a lot on the same sort of lines that we've been talking about, which is a lot about talking about what's missing in core. We've all got our favorites, haven't we all, what we think should be in core. And there are a few that, potentially should be up there and, shout the loudest. But the thing that I was getting, and obviously, Kevin, especially, I hear your points about, simple things like CPTs or custom fields and stuff, simple version in core would make life simpler for everyone. But the thing is, WordPress, in my view, has always been a starting point, since year dot, has always just been a place to start. And I know with the push to make everyone sort of get into the block theming world and Gutenberg and all that sort of stuff, it's throwing a bit of spanner in the works because it's opinionated and some of that opinion is, can be a little bit over opinionated. But as far as this WP Media Core goes, it's about messaging, in my view, to a certain extent. What do we want to tell? What do we hear, and what do we want to say back? And for me, it is about WordPress is actually a start. Is and has always been a starting point. I can't see that changing anytime soon, but just because of the ecosystem, because of the multi-million-pound businesses that wrap around this, insane reach of this platform. So, for me, I suppose the message that we should be sending out more than anything else is that, hey guys, that WordPress is just a starting point, and it's got these insane and incredible possibilities. And you might get lost along the way. You might need a little helping hand, but ultimately that's the long and short of it. And maybe perhaps it's that it should be that as a message from WordPress.org or the communities as a whole should be something that we're pushing more. That it's not a finished solution. It never has been, and I don't think it ever will be. But surely we should be pushing a little bit more on. Look, this is your starting point, and it can take you wherever you want to go.
I like the idea of like the most robust starting point or something like that. Like there could be something fun to play with there.
Yeah, I mean, we could brainstorm strap lines all day long.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. That's a perfect group to do that with. Yeah, I want to be mindful of time and just want to like these are hard issues, these are hard conversations, these are hard problems, and it's why we need to have the conversations. Like I'm a big believer in that, and I'm a big believer in folks choosing to engage rather than disengage. So thank you all for engaging in this. And I do want to start to wrap up only because we are just, I feel like, again, we could talk for hours, which is awesome. But I wanted to briefly mention that Jamie has joined Automattic to be a sponsor contributor to run the WordPress.org YouTube channel. And I'm going to share my screen just to show this post from Josepha. I highly recommend checking it out. Jamie was not here today, but I'm sure he'll be here in the future. And he will be at WordCamp US. And so I think this is a great spot. In the future, let's just push that to the future since he's not here either. I don't want to ask a bunch of questions going when he's not here to engage with him. And I think this would be a great session to hold in the future, is talking to him and thinking about WordPress.org YouTube and kind of having this be a hive mind place when thinking about everything we're just talking about. Finally, I want to mention that I am gathering a group at WordCamp US. And if you're going to be there, I would love to have you join. I'm in the works of doing it right now, and I'm actually going to stop recording because I don't want to share location details just because I am paranoid about the internet. And so I just want to mention that as like a final thing that we're doing. Matt,
yeah, just before you end the recording, quick question on the Jamie stuff. He is going to be an Automattic employee.
Correct.
Okay. And from a high level, do you know if they're looking to integrate contributions from like all of us in this YouTube team? Any thoughts or
Yeah,
anything
that's a
quick on that?
great question. I know, so I actually was part of the crew bringing Jamie in kind of last minute. I got brought in to get it done. And that was something that I know is like on the mind, is like growing a YouTuber space. I don't know what that looks like, but I know we need more voices there. And I know we also need to support folks and empower folks. And so there's I have some ideas of like, what would it look like if we were able to, maybe the Queermatic group through Automatic could sponsor sending someone equipment who wants to start YouTubing. Like there's some interesting stuff that you might see me play with in the future just because I can pull that lever. But yeah, I would love to see more folks contributing there, whether it's like ideas for videos or, you're an expert at talking about whatever, jump on and do like a live interview, like here's, kind of cross collab stuff. I don't know though, I cannot speak to it from Jamie's perspective. And this is kind of uncharted territory. Like I don't know what it'll look like. And kind of in the same way we have to be careful about amplifying certain plugins, and like you cannot amplify things or promote things in WordPress core. Like what does that look like with YouTube channels? I don't know. I don't know if this has been done before. So that's as much as I can say right now, but I think it's something to discuss in the future for sure.
Yeah, and just so it's on the record from my side, because that is a concern from me, because it is akin to amplifying a plugin is amplifying his own channel.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's a really like, I don't know what this will look like, and I don't know how best to navigate it. We have acquired folks before, like the Frontity team, the Frontity framework came in through Automatic and has now been sponsored to the project, and like like there's ways that we have absorbed different frameworks and plugins and then contributed back into the project. So I don't know what that looks like in a YouTuber space. It's really nuanced and tricky. And one of the biggest questions I also had, because I do think there's like an ethical responsibility there. So Barna.
Just wanted to piggyback on the previous question. Matt's idea and feedback is actually really great. Also, on the same note, if there would be any contributions for the WordPress YouTube channel or even on Learn site on different languages, would that be something to host people from different language groups?
Oh, Barna, please.
Because, for example, on talking a little bit on GitHub and whatsoever, this is also feedback to talk about Gutenberg or whatsoever. Most of my students or followers, let's say 50% of them, do not speak a second language. So for them to go on GitHub, give feedback on what they would love to see or whatever issues they might find, they usually channel it through a single person. So it gives a little bit different aspect of way of that feedback. That's why I'm asking if there might be something for different language groups.
Learn WordPress, you can contribute like today. Like you could jump in the training team and record content. That would be a great, I would say the lowest friction way to start. I think this newer pathway is a little bit more difficult, like, because I just literally can't speak to it and it just happened. I will tell you exactly what you're describing of people not speaking English, which is like a very high bar to get a bunch of, like, especially when there's more non-English downloads than there are English downloads. Like that is a huge thing that we need to do, I think, a better job of. And like I was very lucky with the outreach program to work with folks from the Japanese community, the Spanish community, yourself. I think the German community jumped in over the course of a couple years, where they would translate stuff and then act as like the go-between. They would translate content we were doing and then act as a go-between. And I would love to see maybe AI used to help translate some of the videos Jamie does on WordPress or YouTube. Like we'll have more resources to kind of get that information out there. And I think that's a great thing to call out. For now, I definitely encourage you to get involved with the Learn WordPress group, because I think there already is some stuff in other languages, but I don't want to be scrolling madly through this just now. But yeah, I would love to ping me after if you would like to. I can kind of more personally connect you to stuff there too.
Yeah, would love to contribute.
Yeah, agreed. Okay. And let's save like next topic. Let me stop recording. Let's say the next topic about kind of talking about this new YouTube focus. And I'm gonna stop recording.